Hi, Randall. How are you doing?
Oh, Emma, thank you for having me. If I was to be honest, I'm really exhausted at the moment. There's a lot happening in the political scene around home education, but I don't want to go there first because there's a lot more encouraging stuff to talk about as well. But it's pretty tough at the moment, but we're battling on. But I think if people watch the news, life's pretty tough at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. Do you want to give the audience a bit of a background information about yourself, Randall, who you are?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you can see, I'm not exactly a youngster, which means actually we're not practicing home education parents at the moment. We do have grandchildren, and Mary, my wife, does do some online sessions with them. Like too many families these days, we're a scattered family, children all over the place. But we keep in touch with them and we do some home ed, or she does some home ed on the thing. But how did we get into it? Oh, that goes back a long time to when I eldest child, who's now mid 40s, um, wasn't old enough to go to school, but we just assumed he would go to school like everybody else. And at the time, we were going to a church in Manchester, and somebody at the church wanted um, the church to start a Christian school. And I didn't like that idea. I thought Christians ought to be in the community. Um, but the pastor was a wise man in many ways. He decided he wasn't going to say an outright no. He decided he was going to form a committee to look into it. And I could see the people getting onto that committee. So I decided that what I'd do, I'd join it to be the person who argued against it. Won't go into all the details, but 3 or 4 months later, um, the committee came to a conclusion. It was put to the church. It was agreed that we wouldn't start a Christian school, but two members of the committee had decided whatever happened to them, they should not put their children into state education. And I'd done a complete U-turn. I was one of them. And so when our eldest was 5, he went into a small Christian school near where we lived that was run as a parents' cooperative. And that was the real thing about it. It was a family-based school. And that that is what we found the real benefit. And while we were there, we discovered this strange thing called elective home education. We'd never heard of it before. We did, in the end, have 6 children. And by the time the third one was ready to go to school, um, they weren't going to go to school. We knew we were going to home educate them. So our eldest 3 went to this small Christian school that ran as a parents' cooperative, and our youngest 3 were all home educated. They're all responsible adults, no worries there. What happened after that, though, is interesting because when the youngest was about 13 or 14 in 2009, Ed Balls. Oh, look, I'm sorry, I'm on to politics again, Emma. Ed Balls, who was then the Secretary of State for Children's Schools and Family under Gordon Brown, introduced, first of all, a report by a guy called Graham Badman. Unfortunate name. He didn't half get a lot of stick for it. He can't help it. I don't want to say much more about that. But he was asked to do a report into home education, and it was really to pave the way for the first attack on educational freedom by calling for a register of all children who were home educated. That drew us into the political sphere. And we suddenly found ourselves going to Westminster, taking part in a mass lobby, meeting our MP, having a cup of tea with him in a tea room alongside well-known political figures. It was really amazing. Our youngest really found it an enjoyable time we had in London. We even went to a hearing of the Education Committee on where they were discussing home education. But before that, they actually interviewed the prospective Children's Commissioner for England, a lady called Maggie Atkinson, who we might come back to later in this conversation. I don't know. That was all education for us. You see, one of the things about home education, it's a whole family time. It's a whole family experience where we all got involved and we were all learning, but we ended up being political. And the following year, some of your older audience will remember Gordon Brown dropping a real bloomer in a election campaign when he called a lady bigoted, thinking his microphone had been turned
Oh,
off
yes.
in the car. Yeah, you remember it. And his ratings suddenly plummeted. And I'm not saying it's because of that, but Labour lost the election. And in the run up to the election, they'd had to scrap the bill. Home Educated has done a really good job with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, and they insisted the clauses on home education should be taken out of the bill, and they were. And the bill went through, but without them. And all the home educators just collapsed and said, thank goodness that's over.
Yeah.
But I was one of the people that said, no, it's not over. There was one or two others, but it was hard to get people to listen. Life went on. We kept doing things. 5 years later, things began to rumble. First of all, it was Michael Wilshaw, who was then the chief inspector of, I nearly said prisons, no, of schools.
Same thing.
Started talking about illegal schools and home education being used for a cover. And he began to stir it up. 2 years later, a Labour peer, trade unionist Lord Soley, introduced a private members bill in the Lords to bring in registers, and suddenly the home education community got very interested. We got involved in stuff, and my life hasn't been the same since. We've slowly been drawn more and more into political since 2018, and that's where we are. When I get to retire, I have no idea, but this is what we're doing. And right now there is this bill going through, but I'll come back to that later. I keep saying that. So that's how I got here. We started with our families 40 years ago, got picked up with the political agenda coming to the surface in 2009, 2010, and re-emerging in 2017. And now, nearly every day, I've got something trying to protect home education going through my head.
Yeah.
Does that fill you in?
It's there's a heck of a lot that's been going on whilst I've been in my little bubble, not really paying too much attention to things. My background was similar to yourself. You kind of just followed the prescribed normal route that everybody else was plodding on. I like that it was you were there to kind of argue against what you thought, was the home education side of things, and you ended up turning around and realizing actually this could be the answer. It's I'd like to know more about your. I mean, were you political before this, or was this completely just a new thing that happened as a result of finding out what was going on with home ed?
Well, we was political in some ways. I think it was before we got married. We I don't know if we were engaged at the time, but there was something called a referendum on Brexit in the early long time ago now, in the 1970s, was it? Yeah, it must have been in the night, and I voted to not go into the EU, and I must say I didn't change my mind at the last referendum. And so that was kind of the height of my political involvement
Right, okay.
back then. Now, I've never been a member of a party. I got much better things on my mind in lots of ways than getting tied up with politics. But we kept a small eye on it. We kept thinking and praying for the government, but on the whole, no political action. It was really 2009 when I saw the threat, I saw the underlying agenda, and we said, we've got to do something. And we even, one funny thing was that, unfortunately, our MP at the time was Owen Paterson, who's no longer a man who gets many plaudits. But we impressed him so much that he actually, when there was a mass presentation of petitions in Parliament against the Children's Schools and Families Bill proposals on home education, he actually described us as the hard-working Mr. and Mrs. Hardy from North Shropshire.
Wow.
So by
Very
that
good.
time, we were well and truly immersed in it. And
Yeah.
yeah, but
So,
most of my
so
focus is on education. Go on.
yeah. And it's obviously it was your instinct to protect family that spurred you on.
Oh, family. Yeah. Not
Yeah.
just children, but the family.
Yeah.
Family is, I believe, the fundamental building block of any society. But I don't mean just the nuclear family, what we often refer to as family. I actually mean the extended family. And that is the building block of society. There's a lot said about safeguarding today. Well, actually, when it comes to a child, the parent is the frontline safeguarder. But if the parents aren't doing a good job, the extended family is meant to be the next safeguarders.
Yeah.
And then the community that everybody's part of. And only then should you be looking outside to strangers employed by the government to step in. We've reversed that, but we might come back to that later. But for me, the family is the building block of society. And we have seen in Western countries, not just in Britain, but in Western countries, many decades of the family being undermined in different ways, being devalued. One of the things that I keep pointing out to people, in Britain, we used to have a thing called married man's tax allowance. And if you were married, you got extra tax to enable your wife, usually that way around back in those days. I don't think it was a married person's tax allowance, it was a married man's tax allowance. But it enabled your wife to do important jobs like looking after the children when they were young, bonding with them, getting them prepared for life. And it also enabled the lady of the house to look after the elderly. And what have we
Yeah.
seen in society? We are now getting to the stage where, apart from a few decades in the middle, everybody has got to be under either the nanny state in early years, educate, and then through education, they have got to be inside of the nanny state. And when we get old, we want to shove our parents off into care of the state. We get upset because the state doesn't pay for them. And we're saying, oh, well, it's the state's responsibility. No, the family is the family's responsibility. And
Absolutely.
I don't think we realize how much we've lost from seeing the family undermined in recent decades. And one of the things I hope for is there'll be a revolution back to familyhood.
Yeah.
And home education is part of that. So, yeah, very much, Emma, I am really keen on the family, on seeing people value the family and want to strengthen it. One of the craziest things we have in modern society, life used to be hard, it used to be rough, but in a rural setting, pre-industrial revolution, the family was a working team. That's why we have family farms. Well, that's another hot topic, but we're not going there. It's why we have family farms, because the family was a working team. Now what we do, every morning, most families go off and spend their best hours without each other, not in communication and things. And in some ways, during lockdowns, which we won't go too much into, but during lockdowns, some families began to reconnect. And they began to want to say, we want to be a family unit more than just at evenings when we're all tired or weekends when we're all doing other things anyway. And yeah, I believe that one of the things that would strengthen society far more would be to get it back to a situation where one wage would provide for a
Yeah.
family. Not just in Britain, but in Western societies, a valuing of the family. We need to change the system so that one parent can provide for the whole family. We've taken all that away. We really need to get back to valuing the family. Look, we wouldn't need as many elderly care places if the family was able there. It is a really bad for society what we've done, but it's all to drive up GDP. A mum staying at home, looking after children or looking after the elderly members of the family doesn't add to the GDP. We live in an economic age, an economic culture where you are measured by your economic activity. And there's a horrible phrase, which is there's too many people who are economically inactive. And let people think. Again, it's not a road I'm going down. I'll sow a seed. Is that why assisted dying is such an attractive proposal to some people? Because it stops people being a burden on the state rather and taking money out of it. But that age, I think it's wearing thin. This attitude of economics, but it gets into everything. Back to politics for a minute. There has been for years behind any government legislation, they've meant to put forward for many years, there's been the practice of behind bills putting forward an impact assessment. And in 2022, that had something about how it would impact the people in the schools bill then, something about how it would impact the people involved. The one for this bill is on a new model. And the impact statement is all about the economic impact of the bill, nothing about people. That is where we've got to.
Yeah.
Well-being is considered by politicians an economic measurement, but by the population, we think well-being is how you feel, how your relationships are, how content you are, how stressed you are.
We're talking cross purposes, aren't we? We're using the same language, but we're interpreting the words very differently.
And it's important for the population to know that what they hear is that a good one, just while we're on it, because it's going to come up with home education anyway. One of the most common question home educators get asked when somebody discovers they're home educating and are you allowed to do that? That's usually the first one. The next one is, how are your children socialized? Oh, I didn't say that. What about socialization, right? And again, that's a two-sided word. Most parents think, my child's got a great social life. They see friends, they go out and do things with other people. Socialization in politics is how is your child being shaped to fit into the society that we want?
Yeah.
And it's a very different question.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
It's not how whole they are as a person. Do they have human contacts? It is, are they fitting into this box? And
I'll just jump in there, Randall. The point you said there about the fitting into the society that we want, really, it brings me back to the book that my daughter brought home from school, and we confronted the head teacher and said that this material is really inappropriate and shouldn't be anywhere near a school. And the argument that they came back with was that they were preparing children for the world that we live in. And it just made me think, my goodness, we live in different worlds then, because I don't want any of that sort of influence in my daughter's life. I know that there's a seedy side of life, but we shouldn't be promoting it to children, should we?
that line you just quoted is straight from Ofsted's inspection manual.
Yeah.
especially when they go into faith schools. Are you preparing the children to live in Britain as the modern Britain, right? I also say that I heard of one Ofsted inspector, and to this day I haven't found out. It's a reliable source, but to this day I haven't found out he said it with a note of sarcasm or whether they were very serious. But they said to a teacher one occasion, the teachers now decided, well, some years ago, decided that was it. They were pulling out of the teaching profession because the inspector said to them, you have to remember you're no longer involved in education, you're involved in social engineering. Now, that's hearsay. I wish I had it on writing, but the phrase itself should impact people. Education is now about social engineering. So what would I say? If I was the headmaster of a school, teaching children the values I think are valuable, and somebody came along to me and said, but you're not preparing them to live in modern Britain, I would point them to two books. The first one is a book by a guy called Unwin, and it's about the decline of civilizations. And he did some research, and he found that every society throughout history that has got to the moral state that Britain is in today has collapsed. Roman Empire, others, they've all collapsed. The other book I would point them to is the Bible, because in the Bible you get that same story. The best known one, we don't get too much details of what was going on before what people call the flood, but it's a bit of a not likely phrase for most people, but there's a thing about what the judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, and that had got to the state we are in now. Lesser known, in the book of Judges, I think it is, right at the end, one of the tribes of Israel got to the same moral state, and they were all but wiped out. And if I want to prepare my children to live not in Britain today, but in Britain tomorrow, I need to be telling them what's coming down the line. And it is surprising, there are a diverse number of commentators now who are saying the West is on the point of collapse. People like Jordan Peterson did a really good interview with Michael Gove recently, where he told Gove that Western politicians had ruined the West. Melanie Phillips is talking about it. If anybody wants something to read, there's a guy called David McGrogan, who is a legal academic from up in the Northeast. He writes on Substack, and his articles are really helpful on understanding what's going on in society. So there's a lot of people saying we are on the verge of collapse. So I would be saying to anybody, if you want to prepare your children for the future, look at history.
Yeah.
Learn the lessons from it. Who said we don't learn? The only thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history. Learn from it. We are at this point. Whether it can be saved or not by changing politicians, I'm not convinced. But I do know that we have brought the Western world, in my lifetime, I'm in my early 70s, in my lifetime, the Western world has been ruined by a devaluing of the family, which is where we started. And we're now in a place where, well, we know what happened in Sodom. The mob ruled. It's a similar situation in the book of Judges. The mob rules. I've been saying, and I was alerted to this in the early 70s, I've been saying since then, we're heading for a collapse of society and mob rule. And this cancel culture we've got all around us is mob rule in a modern format. The mob turns up at the door and demands something. And that's where we're going. So if Ofsted put that to me, I'd say, I'm preparing them. I'm telling them the values of today, and I'm telling them where they'll go. And where will they go? There won't be much left. And one of the things that is a real danger at the moment is our politicians have lost connection with where the majority of the population are at. And so have civil servants. Ofsted and other people are civil servants. They live without that connection. They live in their own bubble.
Mm.
And they're not helping. They're making it worse.
Mm. No, it's a big club, and they're all feathering each other's nests. It's very difficult to break through, even when something as common sense as, something that's really pretty obviously not good for children, that they will scramble around and try and find the words to justify it and lie to your face. It's quite a soul destroying situation that we're in, really.
Well, let's have a bit more look, all right? Because one of the things, I think it was David McGrogan who I mentioned in a recent article, the penny dropped for me. He didn't put it this way, but this is my layman's relaying, right? Is that we now are governed by people who consider themselves capable. That's fine. I want to be governed by capable people, but at the same time, they consider the population to be incapable.
Mm.
And that is the problem. I want governors who are capable, but I don't want them to think we're so capable, everybody else has got to rely on us. They have got to work in partnership with us, not looking down on us. And now we have this situation where, and I'll use home education, parents aren't capable of teaching their children. They need the state to provide capable teachers. Therefore, home education becomes a danger to children because they're being taught by uncapable people. And that is what's happening. And therefore, we have to supervise parents. Now, that's just an extension. There's a professor from Leeds University called Luke Clements. He works with families whose children have got disabilities. A lot of them have got really challenging disabilities. But he invented the phrase, there's a culture in children's services of parent carer blame. And what he's saying is, if a child has got a disability, not SEND, but a disability, I want to distinguish between the two, and the parents ask the state for help, they suddenly find the training of children's services staff is such the parent must be to blame. And so what happens there, more often than not, they ask for a home visit, they granted a home visit, but then they start asking to inspect the home, even the child's bedroom, and some of them even look inside what food's in the fridge.
Gosh.
Now, this is terrible, all right? But it is because they are taught that most parents are not capable. And this is the mentality through social services and through education. You just listen to the messaging coming out. We have got to do more to support children. We need to be feeding children. Parents can't feed them breakfast. Every school needs a breakfast club.
Mm.
Parents, once they've had breakfast, can't teach their children to brush their teeth.
Mm.
We need to be teaching children to brush their teeth. It is the leeching away of parental responsibility. And it comes from this view that the citizens are incapable unless they are trained by the capable state.
Yeah.
And that is a real big problem today. And I'm afraid, you had a previous guest on this podcast who gave you the impression that the state was benign. Well, it might be benign, but it's not benevolent. It's there. It is always seeking to shift the blame to parents. It is always trying to say children suffer not because the state's bad, because the state can't be bad because they're capable people. But it must be because parents are bad. And that goes back a very long time. But we might come on to that with home education. I'm not going there, but it is there. And what's happening politically? There has been a move internationally to take children away from parents because parents are seen as incapable. And I'll tell you where it's going. We got friends in Finland, and last year they sent me a screenshot of a page from a textbook that's been published in Finland, is being used in schools. And it's called, in English, it's called Code People. I've got the reference. I can say
Say that again.
Code People, as in programming code.
Yeah.
And on this page, it talks about how much better it would be if we can integrate technology with the human being. So one example they use is that there's a picture. Look, it's Finland. They've got trees everywhere, right? So in Finland, in the textbook, there's a picture of a guy using a chainsaw to cut wood. But the chainsaw is part of his arm. It's been built into him.
Okay.
How he eats his dinner with it, I don't know. But, it's that type of thing. It's if we get things. So one of the other things they put forward is this, that what if we could all plug a hard drive into our brains and get data off it as we think? But the one that really impacted me, and I've now got this page translated, and I've got all things there. And it's simply this. This is a summary. I'm working from memory. But basically, it says this. It says, when it comes to reproduction, finding a partner could be quite a problem. So what if you don't have to find a partner? You can just have a baby kind of off the shelf. Oh, and pregnancy is a problem. So we're developing artificial wombs, not just for people with medical conditions, but the implication is, and this is taught for 11 to 14-year-olds, so that you'll be able to have a baby without having a pregnancy.
So they've come out and said it now.
Well, it's in this Finnish textbook. I don't know of any instances where we've gone that far in this country.
Wow. But I mean, that's where we see things going, but I'm fascinated to see that that's actually in a textbook. I'd love to see that.
I will send you the thing, and you can share it with Godfrey and things.
Yeah.
And it is where it's going. And of course, look, we've got a crisis of children with emotional needs. Is that caused by them not bonding properly with parents in their early years? Might be other causes as well. But do we know what the damage early childcare is doing to young adults? Because they've not properly bonded. Now imagine if a baby grows up not hearing mum's heartbeat, not hearing mum's daily routine, not sensing mum's movements. What damage is going to be done to those people? What about bonding? Children bond with their parents before they're born. Some people say, if you want your child to be musical, listen to music, play music while they're in the womb. They get used to it. Babies from cultures that have strong diets, curries and things, have no problems eating mum's milk, drinking mum's milk, though it's full of curry type spices.
Yeah.
right? But let a baby who's not been brought up on that, and so this is disastrous. And I really hope this never works. But it's in the minds of men. It is in the minds of women. It is why they want to take the population. Why? Because they think the family is a nuisance to the society they are trying to build.
Absolutely. And we are.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
Parents are getting in the way of the society. So this is the social engineering. This is the indoctrination. And this is where we need to be warning people. And we need to be saying to people, we have to protect parental responsibility at every level. So schools, are saying more and more that parents don't need to know what's going on. I think that was your experience. No, you can leave them to us. No, I can't. Bridget Phillipson, our current Secretary of State for Education, whenever she speaks, she says time and time again the phrase, our children, our children. Just listen out for it.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bridget Phillipson, they're not your children.
Yeah.
They're parents' children. And that phrase is political speak for children do not belong to parents, they belong to the state.
Yeah. Listen carefully to the words that they're using.
Yeah. And so this is there. And one of the lines of defense we have, though it's been under attack for 15 years, it's not just this latest bill, is home education. That is where we can defend. It's got to be defended, not just for home educators, but if people with no intention of home educating at this moment of time allow it to be taken away from home educators by a non-benevolent state, why have they got so agitated for 15 years and not been able to bring this in? And I have reams and reams of digital data on how much they've tried to undermine the freedom to home educate and are still doing. Why have they done that if it's not a big problem to them? They don't want it because it keeps the children more part of the family, and so on. And if parents in the future, if we get a incredibly I'll just say it this way: what happens if we get a really totalitarian regime in the future? And there is a lesson to be learned. Because in 1919, in part of Germany, they passed a law to say that education was the responsibility of the state and every child had to attend school.
We're not far from that, are we?
Eh?
We're not far off that now.
Well, that was in 1919, right?
Yeah.
It was never properly implemented until a guy called Hitler ruled Germany. And he implemented it and brought in, because there was an existing law, brought in a ban on parents teaching their children at home. Every child had to attend school, so they became the type of citizen the state wanted. Now, I'm not going to say is our current leadership. I know we've had a recent change. Actually, I think they're all singing from the same song sheet. Just some have more nuance and say, hang on, we can't go at this speed.
Yes.
The Labour government has no nuance and is happy to go at this speed. But
it's more obvious. Yeah.
It's more obvious, right? So I'm not being party political here. But what happens if in 15 years or 20 years, we have got politicians who are out either on the right or the left, but have lost so much touch with the citizens that they've become totalitarian, and you can get there on either side. Then they start imposing things. and say, parents, you've nothing to do. Well, going back to what happened with Germany, the Great Education Act, on which the present one is 1996, but the forerunner was the 1944 Education Act. All right? And when it was debated in Parliament, some members were very clear they didn't want a situation in this country that was anywhere near what had happened in Germany. And therefore they built into the 1944 Education Act, and it's now it's Section 7 of the current education, the 1996 Education Act, and they said it is a duty of parents to provide education for their children which is suitable to their needs. And that was in stark contrast to the German mindset that said it's the duty of the state to provide the education. And they did that to protect this country and future generations from totalitarianism. Mm. And it is that duty they are trying to get rid of. The Department for Education, not just the Labour Party. Much of this was going on by under the Conservatives. I do have to say that I know for a fact that what the department have said now in public, they were saying in private 3 or 4 years ago. And it now seems, I thought the Conservatives had no political backbone left. They did have a little bit, because they did hold the worst parts of what the department wanted.
Yeah.
They didn't let them press it. The Labour government has just opened the door and said, you write the bill for us.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now it's all out in the open. And I hope very much parents will understand what it is. The Department for Education believes that, ironically, a German family took the state to court for the right to the European Court of Human Rights. They took them there for the right to be able to home educate, and they lost the case because it wasn't a new law that was being brought in, it was an established law in Germany, because after the war, nobody took that law off the book. So it's still there today. They lost it, but now the Department of Education, if you go behind the bill, there's a document called the European Charter of Human Rights Memorandum, ECHR memo, and in there it quotes several times this case called Conrad versus Germany, which the family lost, and it says, from this, we believe that the state has the right to make attendance at school compulsory. Let me repeat that. The state has the right to make school attendance compulsory. They don't understand British law. British law is written to protect them from that, protect citizens from that attitude. What can we do? Fight it. Stand up against it. Not just if you're home educating. It is the safety brake. If I often use the picture of a runaway tram, thinking of San Francisco, where they've got trams running up and down steep hills. If you're on a tram like that, you need to be confident somebody's got a safety brake, that the conductor can pull something if everything else fails, that will stop the tram. Yeah. And I see the right to withdraw your children from state supervised education as the safety brake on the education system in this country. Yeah. If it's not there, parents lose parental responsibility for the education of their children. this is not just about a few strange people saying, oh, we don't fancy schools. This is about the state education system needing to be kept honest. I must admit, I was at a meeting a couple of years ago now where there was a lot of people on the political right, and they were saying they were fed up of the left using schools to to teach their ideology and so on. What we need to do is start making schools, is take over the schools and make them places so we can indoctrinate them in right-wing policies. And I almost wanted to shout up and say, no, schools should not be a place of indoctrination. Full stop. They need, but the hard thing is this, Emma, you cannot teach most subjects without teaching values. And really, it should be up to parents to pass their values on to their children, but in such a way that allows them to test those values and look at them. I'm not saying they should be imposed on children. They should be tested.
Yeah.
And according to one expert, who again is a barrister and a human rights expert, and I'll probably get her surname wrong, Anna Lufty or Lufty. Anyway, she said recently that this balance is built into the British education system, but it's been lost, which is that schools should present all sides of an argument. They should teach, what they should be giving children is the skills to be able to test the arguments. But that is no longer the case. They are now places of indoctrination. They always have been, but any safety on it's gone. And the only safety break now is the right to withdraw from there. And that's why home education needs protecting. And it's why a lot of people in recent years have left the school system. And I think I'm talking to one person who have left the school system because there is no safety break in the system.
Yeah, the common sense has blown out the window.
Yeah, it has, right? Before lockdowns, the first big driver of people, I talk about back in the 1950s, there were pioneer home educators in this country. Then people like me and others moved in as settlers. We'd seen what the ground they'd taken. We wanted to be there, and we decided to move in. But more recently, for quite a while now, but there's been a growing number of refugees, people who really had no expectation of leaving the education system and coming to home education, but they've been driven there because it's too dangerous to stay in the schools. Now, the first group of people were people who are bullied, with children who were being bullied. And quite often the state school system say, oh, they just need to learn to stand up to it. It's part of being socialised. All right? But they don't do it. There was a report published, 4 or 5 years ago now, I've got it on file, about a Muslim family. Dad was a university lecturer. Mum was a teacher. Because of their income, they can move to another area. And they would move to predominantly non-Asian area. 2 boys went to school. They were being bullied at school. One of them particularly was being called Ben Laden after the Al-Qaeda leader. The parents said, please do something, please do something, please do something. Got no answer until they said, we have to do something. And they decided the only thing they could do was home educate. But the amazing thing was this: Dad dare not tell the people he worked with at the university they decided to home educate, because at the time, and there still is, a narrative going round that Muslims who home educate are extremists.
Right.
This was a university lecturer whose children were being bullied, but was ashamed to own up to the way he was protecting his child. So that's one area. Now we've had, initially it was the state system was being overwhelmed. It isn't just underfunded. There is a funding crisis. But if you promise to do things you can't afford, you're going to end up with a funding crisis. But the other thing is, the state system never, when it was set up, never imagined there would be the percentage of children with special educational needs in the system.
Yeah.
And so it can't afford to look after them. And many parents, after years of fighting the local authority for the help they've been promised but never delivered, have thrown the towel in on the state education system and come to home education as refugees. And please don't tell those parents the state is benign. They know it's not. They know it's after protecting itself, its own pockets, and so on. The state is not benign in their experience. These people have come to home education as refugees. They've grown because the state has been failing them. And what would their answer be if they couldn't take their children out of school? Which is what this bill will do in part. If your child's in a special school and it's causing them harm, you have to get local authority permission to take them out. No local authority is going to say, we're doing such a bad job, we've got to let this child out of our thing. It's dangerous. Now, then came lockdowns. People came out of schools during lockdown for two reasons. One was they didn't want their children wearing masks all day. They didn't want the children being put in the playground with a chalk circle around them or whatever, saying you can't mix. They thought it was not good for their children. Then they threatened to vaccinate all children. That got more people out. The other group of people were the ones who didn't have a meltdown because they're all in the house. The whole family was in the house all day. And some families really did. And I don't want to belittle that. But a good number of families suddenly found they reconnected. They got their children back. They started having conversations with their children.
Yeah.
The family was spending time together. Oh, and a few others also sat in on the online lessons. And not just what was being taught, but the way it was being taught and things. And they discovered this isn't it. I remember reading of one special needs teacher. I think she was in a school for the blind, may have been deaf, but it was somebody like that. But her own daughter had special needs as well. And of course, she couldn't go to school. But while they were at home, she discovered that her daughter's learning means was not by what they were trying to do at school or what she was trying to do in her work. It was by observing things and getting throws during the summer in the garden and things. And she could learn that way, but not in the way that was being imposed on her. So all these people have come out of schools as refugees. Many of them have thought, why didn't I do this from the start?
Yeah.
And now, of course, your situation and many other parents, and I don't think the government understands it. I don't think the DfE can imagine it. They are driving families out of schools by the ideologies and the silly things they are teaching. Apparently, we now have a minister, is it in the health department, who thinks people can identify as llamas? Oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy's a giraffe in the background. You're a piece of wood, all right, Jimmy, don't get offended. But, what sense have these people got? They want people to affirm silly ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
And any parent who thinks about these things can only come to the conclusion this is harmful for my children.
Well, I saw somebody talking the other day about their child there's a couple of children in their class who identify as animals. And they were kind of saying, well, it's not so bad for our child because we teach our child what's right and what's wrong and what's nonsense at home. So we feel that our child's quite well protected. And they don't want to complain because they don't want to create a stink, and they don't want to create a fuss, and they just want to keep the head down and carry on. And I was listening to them thinking, but that's the whole point, isn't it? That you are teaching children to accept the unacceptable, look the other way, and that's how bad things happen. You know, they know the vast majority of people aren't going to create a stink, aren't going to complain, and are just going to keep accepting it. And it makes me despair.
Two things there. There is a growing number of parents who are complaining, and there's a growing move within the educational move to shut down parents complaining.
Yeah,
right?
There is.
There was no internet, there was no smartphones when our kids were school age. Certainly when I was in school, it wasn't that. It was real communication. But I understand now that if your child's in school, you've got to have an app on your phone to keep up with what's happening and all that. And of course, you can send complaints back, and this is now getting overwhelming for teachers, and they're saying we need to stop this. Schools are the experts. They are the capable ones. What does it matter that parents have an opinion? And so if you raise a concern, you're going to meet a culture that dismisses you.
Yeah.
But I would say this to parents who want to come up with arguments like that. Which is more valuable to you, a quiet life or the well-being of the genuine well-being, not the economic well-being, but the emotional, the personal well-being of your child and their throughout their lives? Are you willing to let your child be confused and things like that? Stand up and be counted, or take your child out. But the worst thing you can do is turn a blind eye and ignore it. You will regret it in time.
Absolutely.
And
there's a price to pay either way.
Yeah. So that's it.
I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I found this to be really useful. So I was employed in the school as well. So I made a subject access request, but I also did it on behalf of the children so that they could get their data. And I would highly recommend that parents teach their children about making subject access requests so that they fully understand their data rights. Because if you do run into problems with the school, knowledge is power. So if you've got the same information that they've got, that puts you in a much stronger position going forward.
Subject access requests are quite a powerful tool while they're available to us.
Yeah.
Sometimes government doesn't get it, and they pass these things because they look good, and then people start using them, and then they wish they hadn't done. So yes, it's something to be used. A guy called Farage got them well known in some circles recently. And it is. Let's talk about data because it's important. You see, one thing they're wanting to do through this bill, which is, by the way, so everybody knows what it is, it's called the Children's Wellbeing in the Schools Bill. The word well-being only occurs twice in the Act. It's buried in a lower clause alongside health and well-being. That bill's not about well-being, it's about state oversight, which they believe brings well-being, but it isn't. So this Act has got several things in it that should be of concern when it comes to data. For home educators, they were always going to collect things like name and address of the child and of at least one parent. But this bill is actually like an interrogation list. It is how many hours does each parent spend educating each child? Who else educates them? How much time do they spend? What is the name and address of all these people? And there is no recognition that this might be overstepping data protection legislation, both national and international. And that, worse than that, clause 4, I think it still is, it's just been republished, but early on, there's a clause about bringing in a consistent identifier, or what the Children's Commissioner has been calling a single unique identifier for every child. So every child in the country, whether they're home educated or not, will be allocated a number. They're talking about trialing the national health number, but the point is this: data controllers will be able to decide effectively if it's in the best interest of the child that information is shared on them. This will be able to be done with this number to make sure that all services are talking about the same child. And there might be some restraints on what can be found out, but there's this week there was a presentation by the DfE. It was kind of public, it just wasn't well known. But the things that will get flagged up on it is if a parent is suddenly separated from their partner, that will be on here. It will be, didn't say it'd be a red flag, but it was written in red on the slide. If they miss an appointment with a health visitor, that will go on the record. This is very similar to what was happening in Scotland, where when one father up there, a university academic, asked for his data from the services, he had to go through a long, frustrating process, really, I would imagine, designed to get him to back down. When he eventually got it, they got on it was things like child has nappy rash, shows bad parenting. Father not taking advice allows son to suck his thumb. Boy, what data do they collect? Now, since 2019, we've had new guidance on home education in England. That changed the foundation of the relationship between the state and the parent. Generally speaking, before that date, the guidance was along the lines that if the state is told by a parent that they are home educating, the state should believe them unless they've got a reason to doubt otherwise. And if they had a reason to doubt, they should make informal inquiries. Now, informal inquiries, to me, are exactly that. They're informal. They're not a duty. They are, we're not sure, we've had a bad report or something, we just like to check. But generally speaking, prior to 2019, the home educating parent was assumed to be doing a good job unless there was a reason to think otherwise. 2019, the government changed the language. This was the Conservative government. They said, until a local authority is satisfied that the child is receiving a suitable education, they must deem that it's not.
Right.
But how do you judge if a child is receiving a suitable education? Lots of parents these days have been told they need to send in reports. I've talked with somebody who used to be a home education member of staff for a local authority, and they got 20 minutes to read a report allocated to them. Whether it was 5 pages or 500 pages, they had 20 minutes to read it and to decide if the child was getting a suitable education. You can't do it. You can't do it even if you visit them 3 times a year. Because all the time you are seeing what the parent does, it's an impossibility. And the real test is when you go, if they issue a school attendance order and you go to court, You don't have to produce the evidence to the magistrate. You have to convince the magistrate you're a responsible parent, and you are keeping to what you've said. And the hearsay evidence, nobody collects it, nobody processes, is that a very high percentage, well over 80%, possibly above 90% of parents, when they're taken to court for a school attendance order, come away the order squashed.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is where that's at. So how do you prove you're providing a suitable education? You can only do that through life, right? But what this did, it then started local authorities demanding reports. Some people said, we want a picture of your child working and things like that. Naz Shah, who's an MP from the Bradford area, stated in a Commons Westminster Hall debate in 2023 that one of her constituents had had a home visit, and they only can visit if you invite them in. There is no force of entry. From a member of the local authority home education team who insisted on live streaming a video of the house and the meeting back to his office or their office. I don't know what it was about. And that is a matter now of parliamentary record that a local authority has done that. But the real point of expanding all what's going on, somebody we know, good, stable family, mum was a teacher, had very good record as a teacher, got into home education when she went to a parents' evening and got told that their eldest child would never go anywhere, they just weren't up to it. And mum said, I'm not having that. And looked into it and said, I'm going to home educate. So started home educating. And then post 2019, things began very bad. They basically, they had a visit. Well, first of all, they live on the border of two counties. And the postcode they're in, most of the people live in County A, but some of them live in County B. So initially they got contacted by the home education people from County A saying, can we come and see? And they built up 2 or 3 visits, they built up a good relationship. The guy was really relaxed, understood they knew what they were doing and said, look, I don't think you need me, do you? And that was it. Then they got a letter from County B. Oh, there's a mistake. You're actually in our area, not the other county. We need to send we should send somebody to visit you. Got told it was from somebody from the home education team making a thing about education being provided. Now, through data subject access requests, they've discovered it was a member of the welfare team making a welfare assessment. Then the home education team, we need you to fill in some reports and things. And they said, hang on, we've already had one visit. We need to know, before we give you any more information, we need to know how you're processing our data, what you do with it. It is now over 5 years, and they haven't had a proper response from the local authority. They've had multiple school attendance orders. One was taken to court but never reached court. It's been so bad that mum has had crisis, mental health crisis, felt suicidal at a time. This is a well-meaning local authority that's really concerned about the welfare of the child. And it's still ongoing. They put in a subject access data request or whatever it's called 5 years ago, and they haven't had it yet.
Mm,
So if I would say yes, if you think, hang on, something's amiss here, put in such a request
mm.
and fight for it to come. It will be hard sometimes. I don't want to say it's easy, but you need to know how the state is thinking about you and your children as people.
I think when you talk about data collection, I'm also at the point now where I'm recording telephone conversations and I like to keep a copy of emails or any correspondence, or if you did allow somebody into your home, or you agree to a meeting, I would be informing that person that I would be recording that information for my own personal data records. Again, so that you've got all of the tools that you might need in the future. Not saying that you do need them or that you will need them, but you have them. Just to,
Yeah.
if it's good enough for person A to take recordings, then it's good enough for you as well to take recordings.
Generally, in home education circles, the advice is if anybody rings you up and start asking for visits and things, ask them to put it in writing.
Yeah,
Get it all in writing and
yeah,
keep it. And of course, if you can record a conversation, do. Probably best to say to the person, I'm recording this,
yeah,
just so I've
yeah,
got the
yeah.
record.
Be
Um,
transparent.
be transparent. Um, I would also say, if you can keep it in writing. And if you don't, do log every interaction. Write
Mm,
down so you know. But this isn't, you shouldn't have to do this with a state that is
mm,
benevolent. It's
mm,
because the state
mm.
sees itself as superior to the parent.
That's right.
And that is the basic thing.
Yeah.
So we've not talked much about home education. We've woven it in, but it is part of a bigger message. And I really do want to say to people, look, home educators aren't strange people. We're just people who care for our children, and we want them to have the best. And yes, in all walks of life, there might be people who say, "Oh, there's a door open there, I can walk through it." But you do not police everybody. Let me give your audience a final illustration. Imagine you're going somewhere. You're driving down to London, and suddenly the motorway stops, and you spend hours queuing. And what you find is there's a police roadblock on all three lanes, and every driver is being asked to produce their license before they're allowed to go on. We wouldn't tolerate it. We would say this is state overreach.
Mm,
The state, unless there's a problem, has to trust us that we're driving with a license.
that's right.
And that is exactly what we've been told in this bill and the ongoing narrative now, really for 15 years, that
Mm,
parents cannot be trusted to be parents. And they want to bring in registers. Why do you bring in registers? For control.
mm,
Registers do not protect people, they put them in harm's way because you know, it's really getting bad. We've got to have dogs microchipped, we've got to have cats microchipped. Recently, you've got to have chickens registered,
mm,
and they're wanting children registered.
mm.
And
And taking fingerprints in schools as well.
without parental permission.
Yeah, that was in our
I,
case.
if people have children in school, they really do need to look at a website run by a charity called Defend Digital Me, because some years ago they reported that even schools were taking blood samples of children without
Wow.
parental consent.
Mm,
Please, folks, if you've got family in schools, look at that website, Defend Digital Me. They're against the schools, but it's children's wellbeing in schools bill. They're raising questions. Their major thing is data protection. And do have a look at them, because they are looking at how the DFE is really bad at protecting children's data. selling it on to, it's really difficult for people like the Information Commissioner to do anything with a government department, because as they said on this instance, they really ought to have a big fine, but all that will happen is the money will go back into government coffers. So they reprimanded the DFE for selling the data on school children to firms that help gambling companies verify ages on their apps. And, it is a real problem area. So, think about it. What is happening to your children's data? Do you just accept that the state is actually really cares about your children? Or do you think it actually just wants to keep its own machine oiled? And please protect the freedom to home educate, because one day you might need it. It might be your parachute to get off the plane that's going down.
Absolutely, yeah. Randall, can people follow you and your work? Where can they go?
Yep. I've got a personal blog. It's called No Nationalisation of Our Kids. That's the title I gave it back in 2009, and it's even more relevant now. And there's various other places where I pop up. There's a couple of websites I'm a team for. I will send you the thing. But if people want to keep up with what's happening politically with home education, one or two good news stories, because we really do need them as well. There is a website called the HE Byte, HE Byte.uk. That's got a lot of stuff there. I'm one of the contributors to it. But there's more going on. But yeah, and if you are home educating, there's various Facebook groups. I pop up on some of them. I won't give you the list here now. That'll be boring. But yes, and maybe we can have another conversation in the future to see where things are up to.
I would love to have another conversation, Randall. We'll make sure that you send all that information, because we've covered a lot of information today, and we'll make sure it's all all the links are included in the notes.
Excellent. We will do that.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.